The Center for Human Systems presents the Leadership and Self-Mastery Program. Welcome to course number 9, the final course. It's called Empowerment.
Hello, welcome back. This last course in the Leadership and Self-Mastery program is empowerment. It has to do with supporting the people in your human system so they can also move toward having the power of conscious use of self. Empowering others, as you'll discover, is really about putting into action the ideas we've covered in the previous courses. Michael, you're calling this course empowerment. What exactly does that mean?
Well, you've pretty much said it, Ronnie. The definition of empowerment is supporting others to the power of conscious choice. We cannot make anybody empowered, but there is a lot that we can do to support others to empower themselves. We find it much more powerful to think of it in the sense of supporting teams and individuals to really discover their own power. And that power lies in being conscious about the choices we make that will move ourselves and our human systems, our teams, toward being fully healthy and productive.
You know, I'm going to repeat something that I just heard I think is really important. You cannot empower people. You can only support them in empowering themselves. So I think that's just fundamentally just a huge thing. So what are the ways that you support people, you as a leader, support people or can support people in empowering themselves?
That's a great question. But before we talk about empowering individuals, let's talk about empowering teams first. This entire program has been focused on human systems and the world of organizations. That means teams. And if you empower the team will do most of the work of supporting the empowerment of individuals. The leadership that is willing to empower their teams and their followers will discover how easy the job of leading can be. It will result in your people being turned on and excited, both about coming to work and doing their work. Micromanagement, disciplining, pushing people, ordering people, all those things will be in the past. You won't need to do them anymore if you have an empowered team.
Okay. So, I think what would be really helpful is if you shared an example of this kind of team empowerment that you're talking about and how that works.
Sure. Let's see. I remember working with the head of a government agency in Washington, D.C. Let's call him Frank. This very senior civil servant was at the top of his organization, and he talked about how hard it was to get to the top and how much harder it is to actually stay there. He talked about having to stay on top of each of his direct reports to be sure everything was done right and on time. I mean, he just had this whole litany of beliefs that were making his job so miserable that listening to him was making me miserable. After listening to him for some time, the following 3 beliefs seemed to really come clear. That in his mind, working hard was important. Working hard was super important. That to work hard was what you had to do. Number 2, that people really can't be trusted to do it the way that you can do it. Hence, therefore, you had to do it yourself. Now, so those beliefs were actually what were keeping him stuck in having to work so hard. They were self-fulfilling prophecies. At the same time, however, Frank's wife was getting tired of watching him burn himself out and convinced him to give me a call. She was afraid that he was working himself into a stroke or maybe even a heart attack. As usual, I interviewed his people who are all high-ranking civil servants with a wealth of experience to a person They were frustrated and resigned to being micromanaged and not being trusted. Some were on the verge of retiring in place, and a few were even considering moving on to a different agency where they could really use their expertise and skill. Basically, they wanted to be allowed to lead their departments and see if they could use their own experience, their own ideas to solve the agency's many issues. It seemed hope was given Frank's so autocratic management style.
Mm-hmm.
Frank and I talked for a long time. We probably had at least 5 different hour-long meetings over several months talking about the belief systems that he has that were driving him to burnout and maybe head toward an early grave, and the possibility of a totally different approach. Finally, he said that he'd give it a try. Not because of me, he was clear about that, but because of the pressure from his wife, which he says was always loving, but clearly relentless.
Okay, so Frank had some huge beliefs that he had to get over, and his beliefs around working hard, trusting people to do the same quality work that he was doing, and feeling that you had to do it yourself to get it right. So this is a significant shift that Frank had to make. So can you talk some specifics about how you got Frank to get beyond those micromanagement issues?
Sure. As long as we're clear that this happened over several months, where I talked with Frank about how he could rebuild trust with his team in an empowering way, so that his team felt that they could make things happen, not just Frank. What we'll cover is really a summary of this entire program. So step one was to have Frank's team create a series of goals focused on creating that agency to be fully effective. That included having strategies and generating the kind of meeting agendas that they needed. It included having them figure out how the goals that they created will be measured. Keep in mind, what we measure improves. We talked about his having them figure out how the team's empowerment will be measured. Again, what we measured will improve. So, but notice the whole focus was on them having to do it, with a clear focus for Frank to stay out of the way, except to be a facilitator of the conversation. Now,
can I just ask a quick question, Michael? So it sounds like Frank didn't necessarily set the goals. I mean, he had ownership over it, but he let his team set the goals. Is that right? Like, how does that work? As a leader, shouldn't I be setting the goals and the team figures out how to get there?
What works best if a leader with his team setting the goals. Now, again, these were all experienced senior civil servants. They had been in this agency for 20 to 30 years. They were all very clear about what the goal of the agency was and what their mission was. So in terms of really coming up with what they needed to do to make this a much more effective agency,
they knew.
There was really no issue there.
Okay, so I think that the only...
Imagine if this were like the Federal Aviation Administration and all the senior leadership, was there. Those leaders all know what their mission is.
Yeah. So I guess the clarification that that was super helpful, and I think that one of the things that people may have as a question in their minds is, if I have a very young team who is not as experienced, I may have to be a little bit more directive in setting the goals as a leader. Is that fair to say? But also get the buy-in or the collaboration of the team in those goals.
Yes, but even young folks, I mean, if the leader is hiring people that don't understand the mission of the organization, then I'm going to wonder about his hiring practices. So there shouldn't be a whole lot of question about what the mission is.
Okay.
That is,
all right.
Okay.
Yeah, let's not open that can of worms about hiring practices, but because that's a whole thing unto itself. Mm-hmm. But all right, so you were saying team empowerment, the team sets the goals sets the goals to get to an effective organization in Frank's case. Please continue.
The issue here is the team has to feel that they have influence in making key and critical decisions. So Frank had to let go of those reins so that they could do it. Now, his job is still there to keep things in bound, like if they were really going somewhere, way out in left field, Frank would certainly have said something about that. But again, these were all very, very senior people, and nobody wanted to play in left field.
Mm.
Yeah. He had a second task that is just as critically important as handing them the reins, because without this second one, they won't pick up the reins. He needed to do whatever he needed to do to feel to help his people feel that they were safe, and that it was, and that they were free to truly speak up about, maybe let's say 4 or 5 things. Hidden interpersonal conflicts. They have to get surfaced and resolved, and people need to feel safe enough to do that. People need to feel safe enough to bring up unresolved work issues, so that they can be resolved. People have to feel free enough to come up with new processes that are better than the current ones. People need to feel free to call it if they think that time is being wasted in meetings. Then they need to feel free to bring up new ideas and innovations. That feeling free and safe to speak up about whatever is going on that may be getting in the way, or whatever needs to happen so that we can make things better than they are. That freedom has to be experienced. And Frank's facilitation is key to that.
Okay. So there's a couple things that came to mind as you're talking. One is that we talked about contracting for behaviors, team behaviors back in the contracting agreements for success course. We had talked about, building sort of a support system of your team, and the leader needs to think of their team as a support system, and build critical mass. So I think that those are the 2 things that really jumped out at me as I was kind of remembering back to all the work that we've done. That's
great, and it helps us to highlight that virtually everything that we're talking about in this last course is a repeat of something we've covered in earlier courses, and so this is kind of a summary of everything.
Okay, so we were talking about how a leader creates that safety and freedom in their teams.
So the theme I like here is facilitate, don't dictate. That calls for staying conscious in terms of one's intention vis-a-vis one's impact, so that we can actually see if your intended impact is the impact that is actually being made. Staying conscious about the connection that you have with your folks. And of course, staying conscious with your own dear little ego, because your ego can derail you in a heartbeat. So again, staying conscious regarding intention and impact, connection, and ego management. It was course number 1. We've talked a lot about, as a facilitator, a leader must always be curious, interested, appreciative, and non-judgmental, and do it in a way that is truly genuine. Because if it's BS, people pick up BS pretty quickly. As a facilitator and leader, he must be open and honest about his own issues, about what he's seeing. He must be honest. These are all things that speak to being trustworthy. He must follow through on whatever he says he's going to do. Trust is a key word here. A 4th item that is critically important: conflicts happen anytime a group of people get together. However, if those conflicts are not resolved, they will go underground and they will turn into win-lose situations. As a facilitator, Frank began to learn how to turn conflicts, win-lose conflicts even, into win-win situations where everybody was satisfied with the outcome of those differences. People actually were beginning to learn from their differences, again, through being curious with each other, interested, and appreciative. So they were also beginning to model what Frank was doing. So, okay. What else he had to do? Consensus decision makings. We talked about consensus in some depth when we talked about human systems, and a good facilitator needs to do check-ins and check-outs so that he and everybody else has a good sense of where people are and what's going on.
Wow, that is an incredibly long list of behaviors that Frank and his team had to shift, right? It's pretty much everything we've been doing in this course.
Amen.
Amen.
Well, that's why, this was an 8 months. This was an 8-month process. After
Gotcha.
those 8 months, the team felt like they had accomplished maybe 70% of their 70% of their strategic and operational goals, as well as 70% of their team empowerment goals. Frank was actually astonished that so much could be accomplished with so little effort from him. That's a key statement there. So little effort from him, because his team was doing the work. He was simply leading and facilitating. He actually invited me to dinner with his wife, and she wanted to give me credit for the change in Frank. I said, no way, Jose. That I may have pointed the way, but it wasn't me who had to do the hard work of changing his behavior, through shifting his thinking, through looking at his belief systems and managing them differently, managing his ego in different ways. That's Frank was doing the work. Frank then said that none of it would have happened if it weren't for the tough love that his wife had given him rather consistently. So again, we're hearing support systems.
Right. I think it would be helpful, Michael, if you can give us a little bit more detail on what exactly Frank did to build back that trust and support in those meetings with his team.
Interesting. This is going to wind up being a course in facilitation as well. But then facilitation is really about empowerment. Okay. So initially, let's be clear that I helped a lot with the facilitation. But Frank was always the team leader. After each meeting, Frank and I would talk about what I was doing and how he could take on those tasks. So that month after month, I was doing less, Frank was doing more. He was awkward at first, but he began to get the hang of it pretty well. Mostly we talked about 6 things: not allowing interruptions. Interruptions just create more interruptions. Interruptions create less listening. Interruptions don't work very well. We talked about helping his team deal with one topic at a time. How many meetings have you been to where the group is working on one topic, somebody else brings up another idea, they start working on that idea, which triggers a third idea, and they start working on that idea. By the time they get through there, they're on a 4th topic, and it's time for the meeting to end, and nothing has been resolved at all. If we deal with one topic at a time to resolution, things start to happen. Okay, we talked a lot about his stepping back in favor of team problem solving and consensus decision making, being sure that everybody has a voice, that everybody's voice is heard, that everybody is being curious, interested, and appreciative of what others were saying. Now, all of this takes patience. So helping Frank be patient, because he was not naturally, that's the wrong word. He was not normally a patient guy. But to be a facilitative leader who is empowering his people, his teams, patience works. He had to stay conscious about his intention, his connections, and his ego, and help his people do the same. Those are the 6 things. Questions about any of those?
It's just a lot to remember, to be perfectly honest. Empowering teams empowers individuals. You have to facilitate and not dictate. You have to question your belief systems that are coming up. Stay curious, stay conscious. It's like in not allow interruptions, one topic at a time, all these things that you said. It's just a lot to remember. And, I get how it took 8 months. But yeah, no, I don't have any questions specifically about any of that, but I think,
what you are reminding me of is, that people want to be able to become great leaders overnight. It doesn't happen that way. It's like, if you're going to be good at anything, take a professional basketball player. He did not get that good overnight. He practiced and he practiced and he practiced and he got better over years. Being a true leader, getting past all the stuff that we've learned, that we grew up with, it takes work and it takes time, and it is not necessarily easy, but it is worth it. And Frank and his wife thought it was well worth it. So yeah, don't be impatient. This stuff takes time.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
That's also why it's 9 courses. And I don't suspect that anybody is going through all 9 of these courses in 1 month even. Anyway, go on.
Well, I think that now is when we switch gears and we go into an exercise. So do you have an exercise for us, Michael?